So why don't you start off just talking about how you personally have changed your focus, as it were, from what we used to call CSR to what we now call sustainable enterprise?
Well, sustainable enterprise is a transition from the voluntarism of corporate social responsibility and corporate citizenship to a systems approach, and really it requires us to move beyond voluntarism to a complete rethink of the way we do business, the way we relate to each other and the way we relate to the planet. Having been in the field of corporate responsibility and all its other synonyms for 25 years now, I realised that we'd had some great successes, particularly around multi-stakeholder dialogues, but we got to the limit of change, and that in order to really change we need large systems change. In other words, we need to change a whole lot of things, and particularly the models of business that we have.
Nice.
Again, it's very important, Jeremy, that people understand that sustainable enterprise applies to all our organisations and all our institutions across the whole of society. We're not just talking about big business, as some people think we might be. We're talking about all shapes and sizes of business. We're talking about public, private, not-for-profit, profit organisations. And we're talking about institutions like this university as well. This university needs to be reporting on its social and environmental impact in the same way that a mining company like Rio Tinto does.
So the university is a member of the, or signed up to the UN Global Compact. It's part of the Australia network. You were responsible for that. Would you like to talk in broad terms about the UN Global Compact as an entity?
Well, the UN Global Compact, of course, is now some 12 years old, and it's an example, a very interesting global example of one of those multi-stakeholder initiatives that I referred to earlier. There have been quite a lot of them, but it's probably the most global, and of course it covers, human rights, labour standards, corruption and environmental protection. I'm very pleased that the university is a signatory. Of course, the enactment and the implementation of those principles also involves transparency and accountability procedures, which involves reporting. This university, like a lot of other institutions, organisations, in fact most around the world, still has to do quite a lot of work in reporting on its impact in social and environmental areas.
You, since you've been with the university, have had a lot to do with sustainability finding its way into the curriculum. Would you like to share your reflections on that and maybe comment on what more needs to be done in terms of embedding sustainability across the curriculum?
Well, I think that over the last 5 years we have made significant progress at Griffith Business School in not just talking about these issues, sustainability, global citizenship, corporate responsibility, but actually embedding them in courses. So all praise to the MBA director for getting the MBA to really talk and act on these issues. We have a graduate certificate in sustainable enterprise as well that's been running for 5 years that you, Jeremy, run. That's also about to go online, so that's a great advance. We've also run, hundreds of seminars and workshops over the last 5 years. So we've reached out across Australia, reached out across the local community, but also we've run three international conferences, one of them in Tokyo, on sustainable enterprise and our understandings of that. And I think that's been important. So a small group of people here have really pushed the idea out around the world. So we've been really a very global entity over the last 5 years, and I hope we will continue to be over the next 5 years.
Okay. So let's go from the university level. Let's talk about the issues at the macro level. You're, I think, by anybody's measure, an internationalist. You've lived and worked in many different countries. And you've lived in Australia long enough now to understand the political economy of this place. Can you just share a few thoughts in terms of what the current administration here in Australia is doing with respect to sustainability and climate and the progress or lack thereof?
Well, this is my second time living in Australia, so actually I've lived here for something like 8 or 9 years in total. So, and of course this economy is dominated to a great extent by mining, particularly fossil fuel sector, but also iron, other minerals as well. And I think President Obama's advisor said on Australian television last week that Australia was becoming a laggard, not a leader, when it comes to dealing with climate change. I think the denial of science, the denial of good research is the thing that I'm most concerned at, being an academic sitting in a prestigious university. The research, as you know, leads us in one direction, really, with a few caveats, plenty to discuss, open society, democracy. But actually, this country, I think, in the last few months, year or so, has really gone backwards. And it is being seen around the world, I know through my international contacts, as now being seen to be laggardly as a country. And it's damaging us all as Australians, but actually it will put us behind the curve in terms of innovation, creativity, new products and innovative business practice. That's not good. Now, the interesting thing is that of course the Australian economy also has a very large number, or a significant number, of large international players. But I'm sorry, when it comes to climate change science, they are way ahead of current federal and state government on this. They understand it. They don't say on television, as the Australian Prime Minister did, that it's crap. They acknowledge it, they work to it, and many of them are trying to deal with it as well, albeit that a lot of them are in industries which are inherently damaging to the planet, like fossil fuel mining.
Let's continue with this theme, shall we? I mean, in your career, you've worked with many organisations, both public organisations, state-owned, NGOs and so on, but also with some fairly high-profile private organisations. Maybe you could just share with us some examples of good practice with respect to sustainable enterprise.
Well, I think it's true from my experience that a number of the largest companies in the world that I've worked with over the last 25 years, they know they're on a journey. Many of them have stepped up to the plate and they're trying to report on social and environmental issues, and that has been a voyage of discovery for them because they didn't understand their supply chains and they didn't understand their labour forces, particularly if they had subsidiaries around the world. So that's been a voyage that's very, very interesting in terms of opening themselves up. But it's actually, I would argue, made them more competitive in the long run, because they understand more about their businesses. So I think that's revelatory. Probably top of the heap at the moment is Unilever, and the leadership there that's being shown by Paul Polman. My goodness, can't we have everybody looking at him? Doubling turnover, but decreasing the carbon footprint at the same time. I mean, a marvellous example of a sustainable enterprise in a sense. Albeit, I've talked to them, some of the products that they make, Unilever make, not too sure they should be in their portfolio. But actually a marvellous example of progress in the right direction. Some of the other companies, I mean, many people will know about the Interface Carpet Company, of course, which no longer sells carpet, it rents carpets, will take nothing out of the Earth's lithosphere in the future. I mean, it's a marvellous example of transformational change. But if one cites the best, one should also cite those companies that are trying to do different things. And you have to acknowledge, even though they're a fossil fuel company, that companies like Shell and BP, over the last 20 years, have pioneered some of the reporting on social and environmental issues. So you have to acknowledge the work that they've done and the time that they've put into that area. And there are many other companies that I could talk about as well.
Okay. It's been great so far, Malcolm. I just wanted to, is there any other thoughts, reflections you'd like to finish off on?
Jeremy, I think you're interested in the global research that I'm engaged in at the moment, working with people all over the world. And the most interesting stuff for me is on large systems change. So we're looking at things like the whole food system around the world, because I think actually that food is one of the critical issues now, and certainly the fast food industry really needs to have a spotlight shone on it in terms of its irresponsibility in the way that we have done on retail and fossil fuels. Fast food industry really needs to be there. But the point about large systems change work is we're looking at things like the whole global financial setup. We're looking at food, we're looking at a whole range of other things and trying to understand what do we mean by large systems change? How does it work? How can you interface with it? How can you nudge it to change? Those sorts of issues that I think are fascinating. And my latest book, of course, is about 5 systems changes that I think are necessary, but I also think they're nascent and ineluctable. And they're things like a sense of globality. We're all slowly getting a greater sense that we live in one interdependent space. I think we need a rebalance of science and awe. We need to understand that we know a lot, but we also need to understand that actually we don't know a lot as well. We need to have more respect for what we don't know. In other words, we need to understand that we don't know a lot. Thirdly, I call this the feminization of governance. We need everybody to understand that we need a more nurturing, compassionate, caring, mutual economy. And therefore, I call this the feminization of economics, the feminization of management. In other words, this is about demasculinizing the economy, but it also is about getting a lot of those old, stupid, aggressive white men out of the way and getting other people in power so we can make decisions about economics which are about nurturing and caring for this one very small, delicate planet. And then also, the other thing that I think is interesting, we don't teach people how the planet works. So we need to understand much more about adaptation, evolution, and learning of the links. Most people don't have enough perspective, so they don't understand Earth systems science, and my research on a global basis shows that, and they don't understand how global decisions are made in the social sphere. So when we bailed out the banks, as happened, not in Australia, but in the UK and in America, most people didn't understand how that happened. So ignorance is one of our biggest problems, and our education system has failed us. And I'm talking about from China to the US to Australia, I'm talking about everywhere. And then the final point, final systems change that I mentioned before, is reorganizing, is rethinking our organizations and our institutions. They're all based on an outdated model of industrial capitalism. They don't serve us well anymore.
Malcolm McIntosh, thank you very much.